Hey everybody! I'm actually on time this week for this reading. I try to start at 1 p.m. and usually I mess around and don't get my shit together until pretty late, and then I'm late to start streaming. But today I actually am on it, so pretty proud of myself for that. I have been messing around with my phone camera though, because I feel like it looks more zoomed in than it usually does, but I couldn't zoom it out anymore, so I don't know. I'm just I have the camera set up and I'm looking at myself and it looks really weird to me. But I guess it's fine. I guess it's how it's supposed to be. I don't know, because I always try to figure out what I'm gonna wear for these live streams and everything, and I kind of I like my dressed down look for today, and I thought that everybody might be able to see it, but from my chair it's kind of hard. Here, look. Okay. There. So hi everyone, it's April 14th, mid-April. It's a wonderful time to be alive in mid-April. And this week, this time around, I am going to be reading chapter 15 from my book, Watching Porn. And this chapter is particularly about the way that people get categorized in porn, which is really a topic that it goes really deep. I'm going to read about it, so I'm not going to go into the whole theory of it now, but I think that the categorization of pornography is something that I could probably talk about for a really long time, because it really touches on a whole lot of different aspects of capitalism and the human brain and, human dignity and objectification and fantasy. So this chapter goes into particularly the way that different groups of people are often categorized and portrayed, and a bunch of other things. So that's what we're doing today. But I'm going to take a little while before I dive into the chapter to just hang out and say hello. So hi. Oh, so today is April 14th, 2019, and for anyone who is a part of the world, you know that today is the premiere of the last season of Game of Thrones, and it's a big deal, people. Hello, Lenny! Thank you for being here with me while I talk about Game of Thrones instead of my book. Oh, everybody, I'm so excited and also worried about Game of Thrones, because I am, for better or worse, a huge fan. And I have been a huge fan for years, and I have watched the series many times. As a writer, I really like to look at it from a storytelling perspective, because I do think that the book series and the TV series are both excellent examples of, world building and character development and everything that goes into telling a story. I think they're fantastic examples. And then I feel in the last season or two of the show, as they've gotten farther away from the books, and the showrunners have just kind of gone off on their own, I've seen the quality of the storytelling sort of deteriorate, and that has been hard. So I'm I still enjoy it, because I like the characters, and I like the story, and I like the world. Hello, Rosetta! Thank you for being here. I'm talking about Game of Thrones. Nobody else is. But anyway, so this last season, I don't know if it's gonna keep going in the direction it's been going, which is kind of fan service and a lighter sort of feel to it, or if they're gonna go back to the way that the series started, which is really dark. So I don't know. I'm nervous, but I'm also really excited. We're actually, we're going to go to my partner's parents' house, because they're also fans, and his grandmother is visiting, and she's also a fan, so we're having a big Game of Thrones party tonight. So that's gonna be a good time, I hope. Oh, I'm so nervous. So that's what's going on in the world. I mean, I'm sure that there are other and much more important things that are happening, but I don't pay as much attention to all of them. Rosetta says, never seen Game of Thrones. Yeah, you know, a lot of people have never seen it. It took me a while to get into it. I don't think I started watching it until maybe like the 4th season or something. And I was always like, oh, Game of Thrones, whatever. You know, I'm too cool for that. And then I started watching it and I got hooked. So yeah, that's happening. I don't know. I guess I have a life outside of that. I couldn't tell you what's going on in that life though, aside from a whole lot of work. Oh, wait, no, I know other things. I had to like back out of my Game of Thrones monologue to start thinking about other parts of my life, but now I'm there. So I want to tell everybody about some big news. I've got 2 pieces of big news. The first one is that my book, my graphic novel, the first volume of my graphic novel, is officially out in the world. It is available for sale via the Oneshi Press website. That's oneshipress.com, ONESHI press.com. So you can get a copy of this beautiful book. It's 60 pages long. It's got fan art, it's got chapter covers, it's got Tracy's story in it, and it's super awesome. It looks so good. So there's some good sex-positive stuff going on. There's also some fighting because she encounters some sex-negative people. There's all kinds of goodies in here. Oh, I can't show that page because there's a nip on it. There's actually not much nudity in this first volume of Tracy Queen. It's mostly implied nudity, but some of the fan art in the back gets a little racier than what happens in the book, which I think is actually good because as the story continues, the volumes of Tracy Queen are going to get racier with time. This is volume 1, and this is where Tracy starts out as a webcammer, doing webcam shows, and discovers that she really likes it. And then from here, she's going to try different types of sex work, all like porn-based. And so there's going to be a whole lot of exploration that goes on. But this issue, there's basically just some images of like sex toys, this very inventive one that JL dreamed up. And a little bit of implied nudity, but there's really nothing gratuitous in this one. I wouldn't say that there's anything gratuitous in the whole series, actually. We're going to try to keep it pretty toned down because we don't want the story to end up being an erotic comic. We want it to be a story about someone that has sex, like a lot of us do, you know, and we have stories. So, Rosetta says, "Oh, is it scary?" Game of Thrones, it can be scary, Rosetta, but there's also a lot of violence. So it's not all your typical like spooky, scary type stuff, but there's a lot of really intense violence. So it's probably not very Yuki friendly. But I don't really know exactly what your feelings are on violent stuff, but it doesn't seem to me like something that Yuki would be totally down with. So anyway, this is available now on oneshipress.com in our store. You can get a copy of this for 15 buckaroos, which I think is pretty awesome. Because it's like, there's a lot of art in here. A lot of original art from a lot of really cool people. The cover is by Stevie Ray Drawn. This is an image of Tracy in her living room with her sword at the ready. And you can see these shadows back here, like somebody's coming in. Who is it? What's happening? And you'll find out if you get the book. It's also available on Comixology in the digital format. If you go to the Tracy Queen Volume 1 place on the Oneshi Press store, you can click through to Comixology if you're more of a digital comics reader than a in-person print comics reader. I'll stay with shows like Power Rangers. Yeah, I definitely stick with what works for you, for sure. So the other big news is that there's going to be a Kickstarter launching next week, probably on Tuesday, but I don't want to give away too many spoilers, for the second issue of our series Pack. Unfortunately, I don't think that I have a copy of Pack on hand at the moment, like right next to me. But Pack is a comic book series that we're doing as Oneshi Press. JL Draco is doing the illustrations and I am writing. And it's about a pack of dogs that are vigilantes on the streets of Brooklyn. And it's also about the cops who are like on their tail, and it's also a story about gentrification, and it's also a story about animal rights and, you know, the ways that animals often pay the price for human issues. So we've already printed the first issue of that via a successful Kickstarter, and that was about, well, the first one is mostly about the dog Humility. That's it. He's a mutt. He's a little mutt. And that issue talks about where he came from, what his story is. And then this one that we're fundraising for starting very soon is about Kindness, who is a pit bull who was raised by a loving family but then was kidnapped and forced into dog fighting. And since then he has joined the pack and now he's a vigilante. So it tells a lot about his backstory and also the continuing story of what's going on with, you know, the other characters in the book. So that's issue 2, Kindness. And I can't link to it right now because it's not live yet, but it's going to be soon. So keep that in mind. If you love dogs and hate crime, this is the series for you. So those are the big newses, I suppose, in my neck of the woods. I'm really an old man. I mean, only old white dudes say neck of the woods, right? That's my secret. I'm secretly an old white man. And maybe it's not that secret. Maybe everybody knows. I don't know. Anyway. So, during the last reading from the book, which was 2 weeks ago, we talked about race issues in the porn industry. And it was a big topic. There was a lot to cover, so I did kind of like a, I don't know, like an overview of the way that race issues function in the porn industry. So actually we had a really great conversation after the chapter reading was over. It brought up a lot of interesting stuff. So it was a really, really good reading. Really good live stream, I guess is a better word for it. And this week we are going to be talking about what I call other isms, which is partly what we're talking about. The other, we're talking about, I don't know, the way that people get categorized and broken down, you know, depending on their different attributes, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a really good blurb for this chapter because it kind of covers a lot. So I think what I'm going to do is just start reading. It's a relatively long chapter, so I don't want to start too late and then be going for too long. Rosetta says, I'm going to lurk, but hope you have a good stream. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Yeah, so it's a long chapter. I actually cut out some parts because there's a lot of discussion of like terminology in this chapter. Sorry, I've got something in my eye. There's a lot of discussion of pornographic terminology in this chapter, and I'm not entirely sure what the rules are here as far as Facebook Live goes, so I cut out some parts that had some very graphic terminology just in case that's not okay, and also just cut some things out that were like icing on the cake but not strictly necessary to the chapter because it's a little long, and I don't want to give it all away. I want to incentivize people to get their own copy of this book because I put a huge amount of work into it and it would be cool if I got paid for it. So yeah, sorry guys. If you want to read the whole thing, then get a copy of the book. I'm just saying. It is available in hardcover, paperback, and ebook from most major book retailers. I also have some hardcover copies here in my possession, so if you're interested in getting a copy signed by me, you can go to my website. I think it's lindsayg.com/watchingporn, I think, is where it's at. And you can get a signed copy there through my website. So that would be cool if you're interested in getting one, because then I can send it directly to you, and I can sign it, and you can send money directly to me. And I like that. So anyway, here we go. Chapter 15, Other Isms. And it starts with this picture I really love. It's me being held by Kelly Shibari, one of my favorite people. This was I think this was in 2012. The last time, I believe, that I went to Exotica, New Jersey. And it was right after I cut my hair, so the whole, like, having short hair thing was very new, and I was doing all kinds of spiky stuff with it. And I actually tried to spike my hair today, but it just decided it was gonna lie back down, I guess. I can't tell it what to do. It has a mind of its own. Alright, so I'm just gonna launch right in. Let's see here. Yeah, this is a pretty long chapter. We've got about... Oh, we've got more than 10 pages ahead of us. So, I'm gonna have some tea. I've got a whole cup of water here. We'll see how far my voice can make it. Oh, my phone's being weird. It's like stuck on it. Oh no! Huh. Yeah, my phone's being weird. It's got like the little, like, I don't know what it is, sort of menu bar at the bottom, stuck. It won't go away. So I can't see anybody's avatar when they type into chat now. Whatever. Sure, phone. Do you. Alright. Ahem. Other isms. In an industry where bodies are on display, it's not just race that differentiates those bodies in the eyes of their beholders, or in the budgets of those who hire them. Virtually every difference is noted, categorized, and given a price tag. Larger bodies, smaller bodies, trans bodies, disabled bodies. To put it bluntly, pornography is an industry of objectification. It's arguable that in a capitalist society, everybody objectifies him or herself by selling their labor, but there are few places where this is more baldly true than in the adult film industry. And I believe that there is nothing wrong with that. As Nina Hartley told me, humans objectify. Actually, all mammals objectify. So to say that objectification is wrong is just biologically stupid. And I would argue it's particularly silly to pretend that it should not be a part of the porn industry. Most of us have been warned of the evils of sexual objectification, particularly the feminists among us. But in the selling of sexual entertainment, objectification sort of comes with the territory. In order to price something in the marketplace, that something must be distilled into an object, even if that something is the image of a human body. Like Mandy Morbid put it to me in 2010, porn is work, and as a performer, you are a commodity. Of course, this can be, and frequently is, a source of negativity in porn, but whether you believe that it's positive or negative, there isn't a way around the fact that there is an element of objectification in the human arousal process. We see the body of another person and get a thrill from the way it looks, just as much as, and sometimes more than, we appreciate the person living inside that body. And in pornography, when the souls of the people whose bodies we're watching are obscured by the distance and technology between us, that process is made simpler. At the end of the day, Ryan Driller once told me, I am a penis having a sex with most people's crushes. The viewer, the people, the fans don't necessarily want to totally personify the performers, because then they feel a little bad objectifying them. In pornography, each objectified body is placed somewhere within a complicated metric of supply, demand, and operating costs. In order to turn a profit in the age of internet piracy, pornographers must make difficult choices about how to spend on performers, or how much to spend on performers, rather, and on what types of performers to hire in the first place. Producers tend to err on the side of content that has proven lucrative in the past, since their profits are by no means guaranteed. Very often, this means that they shoot content that portrays fantasies that fall in line with what mainstream culture has taught us to value sexually, what feels safe. Namely, content featuring slender, white, cisgender females with big boobs, juicy butts, and flawless skin. This archetype sells better not because of the objective superiority of those performers, but because they conform to more people's sexual fantasies, many of which were formed by mainstream porn in the first place. So many more people are willing to buy this mainstream stuff that the performers who fall outside of the aforementioned archetype are marginalized, paid less, and categorized into niches. I'm going to go with the niche pronunciation here because it feels weird to say niches all the time. Like, I feel like I'm trying to be too fancy. So anyone who's a niche fan as opposed to a niche fan, I apologize in advance. These are difficult decisions, people, but they have to be made. And so we come back to the difficult yet necessary gremlin of categorization. Though in so doing it risks fetishizing marginalized groups, the porn industry must label human beings in one way or another. Historically, pornographers have been happy to do so. They've created dozens, probably hundreds of categories that break down differences between performers' bodies into niches, making it exponentially easier for consumers to locate what they want. This may feel demeaning for consumers, especially considering the wording that gets used. But consider that most humans scrolling through the list very likely already have a hand down their pants. Their brains are not necessarily operating at 100%. Porn consumers, in most cases, are not looking for a heart-to-heart experience with another person, but for a quick orgasm. Simplistic, politically incorrect terms that highlight deviations from what's considered the norm are the ones that come to mind in such circumstances, and they are the ones that get searched for. Although I should probably point out that this isn't to say that everyone is looking up the weirdest and grossest search terms imaginable during one-handed typing sessions. Lest you be convinced that everyone you meet goes home to feverishly search for big-titted amputee granny gangbangs, not that there is anything wrong with those. The 19 most searched terms on Pornhub in 2016 didn't get a lot further out there than cream pie, gangbang, and squirt. Nevertheless, the bluntness of the terminology people turn to when they're looking for their specific cup of pornographic tea leads us to ponder a troubling fact. What turns people on is almost never politically correct. Far from just the terminology applied to it, human sexual fantasy itself is rife with the kinds of things that make social justice activists cringe, or maybe give up altogether. Sure, people are turned on by sex itself in flavors from vanilla to rocky road, but people are also, and sometimes exclusively, turned on by things like racial differences, disabilities, age play, and size fetishization. The fastest growing search term in the year 2015, according to Pornhub, by the way, was giantess. Our fellow humans are commonly titillated by themes of incest and coercion. If we're being honest, what turns people on is sometimes some of the most disturbing stuff in the world. And, since we're talking about it, I hold up as an example the fact that Game of Thrones is the most popular television series ever in the history of the world, and one of the main themes of the plot is incest. I don't need to go any further into it than that. We cannot police people's fantasies. We can't tell somebody that his enjoyment of little people dressed up as maids and submitting to the whims of a demented, sadistic employer is wrong, any more than we can look down our noses at someone who prefers classic rock to R&B. So long as nobody's being hurt and everybody's a consenting adult, it's a matter of personal taste and consumption. Every human mind is its own weird world with its own axes to grind and its own orgasms to procure, even if those orgasms come from things we would never condone in the real world. So, given that pornography's job is to create, then market and sell the fantasies that people want to see, it's difficult to determine where to draw the line between effective advertising and dastardly fetishization. That's a really hard word to say repeatedly. Fetishization. In some cases, the two look awfully similar. Language that would get most of us fired gets thrown around routinely during dirty talk, both on and off screen, so why should the people putting labels on videos of sex feel any compunction about printing it on box covers or on websites? The explosion of BDSM into the mainstream with the advent of 50 Shades of Grey in 2011, for example, and the exploring that many Americans did after reading it, has brought to light many of these darker fantasies that, it turns out, turn lots of people on. The biggest kink website in the world, kink.com, has rocketed to the top of the online porn world as curious newbies seek out content ranging from sex wrestling to electrocution to master-slave relationships. And although BDSM is most often a safe, consensual, and healthy way for consenting adults to play out their fantasies, those fantasies are usually what most of us would call dark. The words used in many BDSM scenes, meant to humiliate, debase, and objectify the submissive, could come across as derogatory, defamatory, and even abusive. Yet during play, they are the source of deep arousal and a healthy outlet for sexual fantasy. Another complication thrown onto the pile is the fact that while pornography sells us fantasies, in adult films, the real world is the fantasy world. In the act of manufacturing sexy dreamscapes for the consumption of others, Real human beings are paid to act out things that consumers want to watch, but might never actually try. This can include the aforementioned dirty talk and dark, kinky play. It can also include stepping on people's faces or genitals, acting out scenes of incest, or being literally choked with a penis. And while I would never shame someone for enjoying watching any of those practices, so long as I knew that the people who filmed it were all of age, consenting, and being as safe as possible, I recognize the real-world complications that are involved. I myself have a penchant for group sex scenes, but I wouldn't feel okay physically or emotionally if I tried to have sex with 10 men at once. Thankfully, there are porn actors who are more than willing to act out my fantasy for me, and I certainly hope that they feel safe, secure, and excited by gangbangs. But since they're being paid to turn my fantasy into a reality at a comfortable distance from my fragile emotions, I can never be sure. And then there's a little side story that I'm not going to read here because it's like pretty intense, but it's interesting too. I don't know. But I don't feel like talking about gangbangs in explicit detail is a good thing to do on Facebook, so I'm skipping it. Anyway, it's true that porn sex isn't real sex, as pornographers have been telling me for years. These people are quite literally professionals. Smoke and mirrors and a lot of lube application that gets edited out in the final cut abound. It's important to realize that the next time you want to try a DP, or double penetration. But the sex is still real. The people who do it are real, and they are doing it for pay. In the sale of sexual labor, there is a necessary removal of the subjective human experience from the objective performance they exchange for capital. Once that handoff is made, the performance they turned over becomes subject to the demands of the marketplace, which craves fantasy that rarely lines up with politeness. And so we end up with categories of porn that draw attention to difference, and with porn studios that specialize in specific differences in order to capitalize on the preferences that each category represents. These niche studios, fewer in number and smaller in size than their vanilla counterparts, obey the demands of the market in which they operate as well as the politics of the industry in which they exist, and offer what they can to both consumers and performers. The trade-off between politics, politeness, and fantasy often shows its face in titles like Black Tranny Whackers 27. But this isn't a rant about the dehumanization inherent in capitalism. It's an examination of how it comes to pass that human beings with hearts and souls and voices can be distilled into a series of body parts and stereotypes, which, all too often, puts them in categories that earn them less than their whiter, thinner, more able-bodied peers. Okay, tea break. You know, so as I'm reading this, I am realizing that I write very long sentences that are really hard to read out loud. I feel like on the page, right, as you're going through a long sentence, if you get a little lost, which hopefully you don't because hopefully the sentence is well constructed, but sometimes it happens, you can like go back and remember what you're reading about and then read through it again and like get the lay of the land. But when you're reading it out loud, it's like, wow, this is a really long sentence. I don't even really remember what I'm talking about anymore. MD Samir, you are not making any sense. I think that you are a bot. Please go away. Okay. A little more tea. Over my years as a critic of porn... Over my years as a critic of porn as a product and a hanger-on to the industry that makes it, I found myself gravitating, as I've noted, toward feminist pornography that leaned far to the left. Queer, indie fare that employed performers who didn't always fit the white, thin, able-bodied mold that the mainstream industry tends to employ. Predictably, as I was drawn into this smaller world, I began to interview and thus get to know the performers and directors who make it. I felt a kinship with those who chose the less beaten path, or whose journeys were defined for them by virtue of their inability to fit the expectations of the mainstream porn industry, or of the mainstream world at large. In a way, getting to know the people who didn't even bother with red carpets and VIP lists brought me closer to myself. If I had never branched off into their corners of the industry, I would never have gotten to where I am, politically, personally, or sexually. Their thoughtful answers to interview questions, coupled with their political activism and serious hotness, helped me learn what gender studies in college might have, in a more exciting way than I probably would have gotten from academia. But as I watched their careers take shape, I was forced to watch them struggle with just how difficult it is to be an other in an industry that has already been othered to hell and back by the rest of the world. Most of the people I was getting to know were plus-sized or trans or disabled or fit into any number of other categories that placed them neatly into one of porn's less public niches. The viewership for most niche porn is significantly smaller than that of mainstream content. With a smaller customer base to sell to, there are fewer studios that regularly shoot niche content featuring performers of color, trans actors, models of size, performers of different ability levels, and so on. And whereas there were once dozens of companies in Los Angeles shooting most of the kinds of niche content, there are now only a handful for each specialty. Most of those studios don't have a lot of cash to throw around, which is the biggest reason that they often pay lower rates. And although the talent pool in any one of these categories is smaller than the more mainstream ocean of models, there are always more actors than there are scenes to shoot or studios shooting them. With a glut of talent and a paucity of roles, the inevitable occurs. Someone is always willing to take lower pay. And since lower rates can be paid, they are. Once a director has paid a lower rate for one transgender performer, for instance, that director will be loath to up their rate the next time around. Other directors will also resist paying more than their competition, and thus the going rate for a transgender scene is lowered across the board. Capitalism in play, right? That's how it works. A troubling caveat is that the amount of money these niches make is often disproportionate to the amount that they put into production. The porn industry is infamous for its unwillingness to show the numbers, but it's been stated repeatedly by industry insiders that niche porn out-earns its mainstream competition by a large margin. Those who want to see high-quality niche pornography faced with few options are willing to pay more than those with more normal tastes. And normal is in quotation marks there, because in human sexuality, really, nothing is normal. In an interview in 2011 with the CEO of JuicyAds.com, I was told, the harder to find or the more obscure the porn is, that's where people are making money. I mean, how many teen websites are there? How many amateur sites are there? You don't have any problems finding them because everybody has 20 of them. But balloon-popping busty giantesses in tutus? If that's your fantasy, you'll be happy to pay whomever can provide it. Perhaps the biggest money-making niche. Sorry. Oh no, I'm going back on my own declaration about pronunciation. Pronunciation declaration. The Declaration of Pronunciation. I am a big word geek, you guys. Anyway, hang on. Tea. Oh, that's some good tea. Tell you what. Okay. Perhaps the biggest money-making niche, particularly given its comparatively diminutive size, is mainstream trans porn, which is called TS porn in most mainstream websites and marketplaces, so I'm gonna mostly refer to it as TS porn here. I should have made it trans porn, but I was trying to make it recognizable to people who are reading it, who are going to big mainstream websites and are probably seeing TS as a category as opposed to trans. So it's going to be TS. Though Venus Lux, who won the 2016 AVN Award for Transsexual Performer of the Year, estimates that there are about 10 companies or fewer shooting TS now, it's well known in the industry that this type of content earns far more per scene than its competition. TS porn features predominantly trans women. Trans men are more frequently seen in queer porn, paired with cisgender men, and it is the fourth most popular genre of pornography on the worldwide market. It is searched for more frequently than butts or threesomes, according to the authors of A Billion Wicked Thoughts. Fans of TS porn, who are overwhelmingly straight white men, are devoted enough to pay more for what they want to see, too. Evil Angel VP Adam Grayson told International Business Times in 2015 that transsexual porn earns more than standard porn. Hands down, without a question, he said. Nothing even touches it. His company can charge a full 25% more per TS movie at the extremely marked down wholesale level than for a typical mainstream film, and fans will pay the increased retail price for the chance to see it. Trans performers, thus, earn more for their producers than their cisgender counterparts, scene for scene. But, despite its outsized contributions to the industry, the TS segment of the adult talent pool has long faced discrimination both in pay and representation. Lenny says, I think I prefer when it rhymes with bitch. Wait, when what rhymes with bitch? Oh, niche. Niche and bitch. Oh, yeah, that works. That makes sense. I get it. I was like, what rhymes with bitch? What are we talking about? I won't try to make this book a primer on transgender issues, but I will take a moment to say that trans women are a diverse group. They come from every conceivable background and share virtually nothing aside from a gender identity that isn't as common as others. But mainstream porn expects that they present themselves, both cosmetically and sexually, in very specific ways. TS girls, as they're often called, are more or less required by most porn companies to be tall, willowy, and traditionally feminine in appearance, with large breasts. They're expected to wear hyper-feminine clothing and lots of makeup, and to pass as cisgender women in their daily lives. But once they take off their clothes for the camera, they must be endowed with penises large enough for porn, which is to say, quite large indeed, and those penises must be capable of achieving erection and ejaculation on command, like those of cisgender men in porn. Of course, there are some trans women well suited to these prerequisites, but there are many more who don't fit into this narrow definition of what a TS girl should be, according to what producers think straight white men want to see. Tobi Hill-Meyers, who has worked behind and in front of the camera in both the mainstream and indie segments of the industry, has written, spoken, and even produced a film about her experiences with mainstream production companies who wanted her to conform to their expectations. Hill-Meyers prefers a less traditionally feminine look, but she was asked to shave her legs and wear heels to her first shoot. When the sexy stuff started, she writes in the feminist porn book, quote, I wasn't allowed to be sexy the way I would be with my own lovers or partners. I had to fit an entirely different model. And while it's all well and good for a director to have an idea of what they want to shoot, it's another to expect that all trans women are going to behave the same way to conform to that ideal. And no matter what, it's not okay to ignore the contributions of those who have excelled in the genre. Until 2012, TS performers were largely ignored during awards season, being shunted off the red carpet without getting to the media for interviews, and, familiarly, not being given a slot for their awards during the annual AVN Awards show. After decades of this treatment, performers balked, and rightly so. AVN capitulated after some of the TS performers vocally crusaded against this lesser-than treatment, and the award for Transsexual Performer of the Year is now presented on stage during the ceremony, while TS stars are encouraged to strut their gorgeous stuff on the red carpet along with everyone else. Meanwhile, the Transgender Erotica Awards, which were called the Tranny Awards from their inception in 2008 until 2013, were renamed in 2014 by event organizer Groovy after performers expressed discomfort with the terminology. And while there are still leaps and bounds to be made within the industry about the representation of diversity and the terminology used in reference to trans models, the use of derogatory labels has been on the decrease since outspoken trans women in the industry have begun speaking their minds. And for all this talk over TS porn, it's important to note that as far as mainstream porn is concerned, there's only one kind of trans person worth filming: trans women. Although there's a growing number of trans men, like two of my favorite human beings, Buck Angel and James Darling, who are making their own content and demanding more visibility, the trans male porn market is still virtually non-existent. Basically, the straight white cisgender guys who run most of the porn industry don't want to deal with trans guys as sexual beings, convinced as they still seem to be that the people who buy porn all look and think exactly like they do. They've relegated trans guys to indie porn and the occasional novelty item, even as awareness of trans issues has bloomed across the American consciousness in recent years. It's depressing to see, but it's also amazing to watch as trans guys in porn develop their own markets and show the mainstream world a thing or two about what people really want. And that's really true. Actually, since this book was published, there's been, it's still not like super mainstream, but there's definitely a few trans guys who are getting cast in more mainstream productions and are like making big names for themselves. So for a while, there were like a few people operating mostly in indie and feminist porn, as trans men, as far as trans men go. Basically, it was James Darling, Buck Angel, there was Billy Castro for a little while, and that was kind of it for a long time. But in the past few years, there's been a bunch of new performers who have shown up and just been like, hey, I'm hot, so, you know, make sex scenes with me, and it's worked. So that's been really great to see. But the world of niche porn is still dominated by inequality. Similar issues are found across most niche categories. BBW, which stands for Big Beautiful Women performers, for instance, are not as numerous as their thinner counterparts, but their fans are extremely loyal. Though the category itself is established enough to prove that it makes money, very few studios are willing to shoot BBW content until Though the category itself is established enough to prove that it makes money, very few studios were willing to shoot BBW content until well into my time as a porn critic. There was no recognition for BBW actors in industry awards ceremonies. In the late 2000s, however, BBW performers with strong fan bases and a lot to say about the way they were being represented began to pop up around the industry. And when women like Kelly Shabari and April Flores pop up, they refuse to go unheard. These two performers, and many other plus-size performers in recent years, have spoken up about representation in pornography, and everywhere else. And yet, despite the great strides that have been made, plus-size models still have only a handful of production companies for which to work. At AVN in 2016, Tim Von Swine told me, excuse me, I've been working with a lot of plus-size girls. The plus-size girls genre is never going to go anywhere, though, and I'll tell you why. There's not enough companies to shoot it, to put enough money into it for all of them to take it as seriously as it needs to be taken. I love the fact that these girls are willing to take their clothes off on camera. They love it. They want to do more stuff, but there's no one around to shoot it for them. To further salt the wound, BBW performers also earn less than their smaller contemporaries. In an article for XO Jane, Kelly Shabari estimated that rates for plus-size scenes cap out at around $400 for boy-girl pairings. For comparison's sake, slimmer women can earn up to $1,500 for the same kind of scene. Familiar supply and demand reasoning stands behind the lower rates for BBW performers, as it does in any other niche category of pornography, and it stands up to about the same level of scrutiny. It makes a modicum of economic sense, but that sense doesn't make it right. Performers in all niches have become more vocal about how they would like to be represented, more respectfully, and in many cases these efforts are being rewarded by updated terminology, stronger recognition by the established industry powers, and greater visibility in the mainstream media. But across the board, niche models are still paid less by fewer studios and then marketed to consumers in ways that often go against their wishes. Ugh, my throat's getting dry. Excuse me. Updating the terminology and representation for performers is an important step. Calling the stars of a film differently abled, for example, rather than crippled, isn't a particularly difficult transition, and switching out the she-male button on your website for trans presents only a minor confusion for viewers. But categorization is still necessary, especially in the case of niche studios that cater to a specific customer base whose loyalty has been hard-earned by years of consistent output of a specific type of content. Especially since tube sites where pirated material can be posted for free by any user are happy to categorize videos however the person who uploads them decides to describe them, doing away with categories that keep videos firmly in their given niche is not a viable option for most. There are a few brave souls trying to prove that categorization doesn't have to be demeaning. Many queer porn outlets like Pink and White Productions and Fox House Films label their performers and scenes according to the wishes of their performers. And Trenchcoat X, an indie company co-founded by Stoya and Caden Cross, technically I don't think they're indie anymore. I think they got acquired by Evil Angel, I think. Anyway, they have reinvented the standard porn labeling system in favor of gender non-binary, non-discriminatory terminology like breasts, natural or augmented, pubic parts, mostly internal or external, heterosex, the help, /dildos, toys, etc., and so on. As reported in The Nation, it is an attempt to recode a landscape of commodified sexuality that promotes retrograde categories as titillating transgressions. And so far, it seems to be working. The integration of different types of scenes into more mainstream content is another option, and it's one that some studios have tried. Not every scene featuring a black male actor, for instance, needs to be labeled under interracial, because most consumers have no aversion to seeing performers of color in their smut. However, those specifically seeking that kind of scene might balk if their favorite category was done away with, leaving them casting about for the content they wanted. And so, many sites persist with outdated terminology. Perhaps a shift from within could start with payment. It could be like a dream from a social justice perspective if the entire industry switched to an equal pay for equal work model in which everyone, regardless of their physical attributes, were paid on the same scale. Some indie and feminist porn companies already operate on this model, like Pink and White Productions. But, given the subjective nature of porn performance, this could be impossible to nail down across the wide expanse of the porn industry. What a standard boy-girl anal scene is worth to one director may be very different from what it's worth to another, depending on that director's customer base and budget. And it would hardly make sense to offer a brand new performer the same rate as a veteran of the industry with multiple years of experience and a few awards under their belt. As it stands, performers can command their own prices, and many do, according to experience level, skill set, and how often they want to work. But if their price is too high for directors to pay, they can be left high and dry. One must be competitive to get cast. Having a good agent to stand up for you helps with that. But base rates are base rates, dictated by supply and demand as well as by what producers and their bosses consider appropriate. Anyone who wants to be hired as a new performer needs to get in line and work their way up. And in that line, white, thin, able-bodied women are at the front, and everybody else is behind them. Cindy Gallop and her MakeLoveNotPorn.tv team are attempting to provide a new business model that could help level the playing field if her company proves that it is sustainable and profitable. They are profit-sharing with performers. When profits are split down the middle between the website administration and the people doing the labor on camera, as they are at Make Love Not Porn, regardless of their race, class, size, ability level, gender, or any other identifier, there is no way to discriminate or to cut pay from anyone. I would urge the porn industry to have the courage to believe that you can do things differently, and do them... Wait. Hang on. Oh, okay. It's all about how you put the emphasis on these... Okay, hang on. Rewind. We're doing the sentence again. I would urge the porn industry to have the courage to believe that you can do things differently and do them differently. Within the porn industry, as I say, there is now enormous room for individual creative vision, said Gallop. And with so many things, the most radical change may have to come from a larger shift in the way that sexual value is assigned culturally. It's no coincidence that the recognition of trans and BBW performers as important members of the porn community has come at the same time that widespread acceptance of transgender people and people of size has swept the American mainstream. With advocates like Laverne Cox and Melissa McCarthy gaining visibility in Hollywood, the movements backing them are changing the way that Americans see people who look and identify differently. Once the world has had some time to get used to the idea that white, able-bodied, skinny, cisgender women are not the only people who can be accepted as sexy, the porn industry may find itself eager to catch up with the times by expanding its definition of who belongs in mainstream porn and who deserves to make competitive wages. As fervently as I believe that my friends in queer, indie, and feminist porn, who proudly own their beautiful, unique bodies and desires, deserve to be paid just as well as the hottest mainstream porn actors, the rest of the world has not quite caught up with our way of thinking just yet. At the AVN Awards in 2011, I looked for my new friends from the fringes of the industry, but I was disappointed to see very few in attendance. Most of them would have been welcome at the awards ceremony as audience members, but there were very few awards available for people working in their niches, and there certainly wasn't space for them on the media-friendly red carpet outside. As the parade of normal people plodded across the stage before me, I sighed and downed more whiskey. All right, whew, that was a long one. Heck, I even cut out a few pages, I think. Like altogether, probably a few pages were cut out. Whew, but there were a lot of long sentences there, and a lot of terminology, and a lot of words, and my throat is actually like dry and sore now. Lenny says, change social perspectives plus pay equals room for change. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the kind of thing like, I mean, we've seen it very particularly recently in Hollywood, right? Like, people are starting to get really pissed when they cast white people in roles that are like clearly meant for people of color. You know, people are getting really pissed when like people are just not being represented properly. And it's actually finally starting to change in Hollywood, because like it took forever. I mean, forever. Like Hollywood was so afraid, and still largely is so afraid, to make a movie with, say, a black person in the lead that isn't full of ridiculous stereotypes, that isn't demeaning, that is just like a story about a person. Like, it took them decades to be like, oh wait, hang on a second, a lot of people would go and see that movie. Like, they were so afraid to take chances and so afraid to make money that they convinced themselves that everybody knows that if you cast a black person in a lead role in a Hollywood movie, nobody wants to see it, so nobody will pay for it, so there's no reason to put your money behind a project like that. Like, for so long. And it's been slowly changing here and there, you know, like drips and drops, but I feel like over the past few years, probably mostly because of Jordan Peele and Get Out, which I still have not seen, and it is driving me crazy. Like, people are starting to be like, oh wait, no, hang on, you can have like an entirely black cast and have a fantastic movie, then people will go see it because it's good and people like that. Like, but it took forever, and it had to be just like tiny little chinks in the armor here and there for a long time, until I still would argue that we have not hit critical mass with that, but it's getting closer, you know? Like, I was just looking at the live action, quote unquote, Lion King that's coming out soon, which I'm really excited about. Like, I watched the trailer for it the other day, and just the music, when I heard the music, I got like goosebumps all over my body. But like, you know, they're remaking it, and pretty much like everybody, all of the characters in the cast that like, you know, are like many of them, not all of them, you know, most of the characters in the cast, they're all African because it happens in Africa, and so like they actually cast people of color to do the voices this time around. I'm like, hey, we're getting somewhere, way to go, guys. Like, and people will totally pay money to go see that movie. Like, it's totally fine. People definitely paid money to go see Black Panther. Like, anyway, I clearly did just go on a whole rant about that, but I feel like it's a similar thing with porn. Like, the people with the money have been so afraid of losing money for so long that they have just continued to do the same thing, using people who look the same way for decades, because that's what they feel safe making, and they don't want to lose any more money. And so they convince themselves that if you don't do things a certain way, if you don't hire people who look a certain way, if you don't categorize your content a certain way, nobody will buy it and you will lose money. And that has been just the conventional wisdom in the porn industry for years now. But the thing is, like, the people with the money are not keeping up with what people actually want. And then the difficulty with porn is, because pornography is such a tastemaker for people's sexual appetites, because we don't talk about or educate people about sexuality in a healthy way, everybody turns to porn, especially now. The thing is that, like, rather than like finding what you like and discovering what you like from inside, a lot of people are educated about what is sexy by watching porn. And if what's available to you is based on this idea of like, we can only do what's safe, we can only do what we know sells, and all of that looks a certain way, then you have a whole lot of people whose brains are taught from a young age that that is what's sexy. And that can create this horrible loop where like people outside of a certain very narrow category of human being are labeled as other, or labeled as niche. And in a lot of ways in America, you know, we're working on changing a lot of those ideas outside of porn. Like, there have been, you know, protests and movements about many different types of representation for different types of people, you know, like the United States Congress is changing. It's getting browner and more female all the time. Like, we are moving forward slowly and shamefully, difficultly, shamefully with difficulty. I don't know. But nobody looks at porn in this with the same amount of importance behind it. You know, nobody is like, we really need to work on representation in porn because it's important. Instead, it's like, oh, well, you know, people who respect themselves don't go into porn, so we don't really need to advocate for anybody in porn getting better representation because, you know, it's like beneath our pay grade to talk about it. But I would argue that, like, especially in a form of media that flies so below the radar, and a form of media that can have such a formative impact on what we find attractive and valuable in human beings, pornography plays a really big role in the way that we see human beings. And I would argue that, you know, every generation after mine even more so has this going on, even more so. Because I watched porn when I was a kid, but not very much of it because you couldn't get porn on like dial-up internet connections, and there wasn't free streaming porn in the way that there is now. But I know that I was still affected, you know, like what I consider to be sexually attractive was definitely affected by pornography over the years. And, you know, if I had seen that when I was like 9, if I had seen mainstream porn when I was 9, it could have really, really gotten into the old brain. So I would argue that equal representation in pornography is vastly more important than people really give it credit for. But by the same token, and this is something that I could go back and forth on all day, I could probably sit here on camera and argue with myself for hours about this. The other side of the coin is that it's not porn's job to provide us with exactly the best and most socially responsible content. Pornography is a for-profit industry. It's entertainment. It's meant to be entertainment. It's not meant to be, you know, the formative sexual experience of everybody's life. It's not made with the idea of being sex education, and it shouldn't be. You know, there are definitely a lot of pornographers out there who are all about educating the masses and giving equal representation and like doing it right. And that's fantastic, and I love those people. They're some of my favorite people in the world. But, you know, that's their decision to make that kind of content and to do a good thing in the world, and that's great. But we should be educating people about sex and sexuality as a culture. Like, we should be teaching kids about sex and who is desirable, and teaching people to be loving and kind and not to see people who look different from other people as inferior. Like, we should be doing that work as a society because it's the right thing to do, and not leaving it up to pornography to teach kids what's okay and what's valuable. So, like, on the one hand, I do have a huge amount of respect for people in the adult entertainment industry who take up that burden and decide that they're gonna, you know, be the change that they want to see in the world. Like, freaking fantastic, awesome. But on the other hand, it's like, well, you can choose not to watch something that somebody has made that you don't agree with, absolutely, and you should. You know, don't ever pay money or, you know, give the time of day to somebody who makes shitty material that you think is bad. But you can't say that it doesn't deserve to exist either. Like, it's entertainment, and people who want to watch that entertainment can and have a right to. So it's a super tricky, like, there isn't really a right or wrong here, I think. I mean, there are some things that are clearly wrong. Paying people less for the same work because of the way that they look is wrong, I believe. Like, so there's always the, like, there's so many different aspects to the concept of categorization in pornography. Like, there's, you know, what happens on the consumer end versus what happens on the production end, and that's where the differences in pay really are important. Like, obviously, you can't be paying people differently because they're bigger or smaller or have different ability levels. Like, that's not okay. You can't do that anywhere. Like, that, I'm pretty sure that that's technically against most laws to do that. But I mean, obviously people across every industry do it anyway. And actually, no, it's not against the law to pay disabled people less. I don't know like what exactly all the rules are there, but I do know that it's legal to pay disabled people significantly less than other people, which is total horseshit. But the thing is, in pornography, with very, very few exceptions, everybody's an independent contractor. So you don't actually have companies that are hiring actors as like full-time employees, and therefore any laws that do apply to discrimination in pay don't apply in that model. So you can pay a model whatever you're able to, whatever you want to, and pay another model next to them who looks different or is, you know, differently abled, something different, and nobody can make you not do that. You just have to make your own decisions as a producer or a director about what you're paying people. And so, yeah, there definitely is wrong there. There is wrong being done. People should not be paid less for equal work. But as far as like saying that you can't call somebody a certain name, or you should always be sure that every production that you make has somebody, you know, somebody of size and at least 3 people of color and at least whatever type of sex acts, like trying to make everything totally egalitarian, you can do that if you're a really awesome person and you want to be like as super fair as possible, but you don't have to, because it is still entertainment, right? Like, it's not necessarily your job to do it the way that is the most egalitarian. And so it's super complicated. It's just super complicated. Like, you can't just tell people like, okay, well, the new rule is that this is how we do things because this is the most socially just way to do it. Like, that doesn't work. It's art. People make art for many reasons, and most of the time in porn, people make things because they want to make money. And you can't necessarily convince somebody that making something that meets, like, ticks off all the boxes for social justice is going to make them as much money as the really grossly labeled thing where they pay people different rates for the same work. Like, it's complicated. And I do think that one of the really difficult to pick apart issues there is the fact that, like, you know, it's a fantasy. Porn is a fantasy. So we have to make what people want to watch. And that's true. That's true. There is a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of editing. You know, what you see in a finished porn production is not necessarily what actually happened on set that day, right? And they're making up ridiculous situations. Like, going back to Game of Thrones again, there's a new Game of Thrones porn parody out. It's ridiculous. Like, the jokes are so bad. The English accents are so bad. But it's making waves because everybody's got Game of Thrones fever right now, so they're like, it's all over the internet. People are watching it left and right. But, you know, it's a fantasy, right? Like, there's dragons and White Walkers and everything. It's a fantasy, and I don't think that anybody who worked on that movie is going to tell you that porn sex and porn generally is reality. It's a fantasy. So there's a whole lot of like leeway that people give themselves when it comes to that. Like, porn is a fantasy. We're not trying to educate anybody. It's not our job to educate the populace or to do the thing that is the best in this production because it's ridiculous. It's porn. But that argument really doesn't go very far because, like, the people that you're hiring to perform in that scene are still real people. They are still really doing all of the things that you are recording them do, even if they're doing it in ridiculous costumes or, you know, playing different roles where they're stepbrother and stepsister or something. Like, no matter what the conceit is that allows you to say it's a fantasy, it is actually happening. And that's where the difficulty comes in, right? Like, you can't tell people that it's not okay to have a fantasy about some wildly out there, sexual escapade that they kind of want to do in their head. You can't tell people that's wrong. People have their own arousal patterns for their own reasons, and a lot of the time people's things that turn them on are horrifying to them. Like, they would never want anybody to know about it. They would never want it to see the light of day, but it's still there, and it's still an important part of who you are as a person, your sexual fantasies, right? So like on the consumer end, I'm like, no, everybody do whatever works for you, watch whatever porn you want, because it's your right and it's your brain and you're entitled to pleasure. But then when it comes to the actual production side of the equation, and it's like, well, okay, yeah, it's a fantasy when it's being consumed, but when it's being made, people are actually doing these things. People are actually getting paid for this. Are they all getting paid fairly? Are they all consenting to what they're doing? It's a real conundrum. I want everybody to have access to what makes them happy, but I don't want the people who are involved in making it to be demeaned or to be called horrible names or to be paid less than they should be. So it's a real conundrum. And it's made even more complicated by how diverse and spread out and unregulated the porn industry is. It's an industry insofar as it's got a labor force and people paying people for their labor, but it's very spread out and unregulated, and people kind of do whatever they want as long as they conform to, specific laws that they have to. It's really hard to get everybody doing the same thing, which is actually probably good, because then there's more diversity in content, which is what people want. But I am really rambling right now. I don't know if any of that's actually followable. Is it just the stuff that goes on in my brain when I start talking about these topics? So there's also a little update. I had talked a little bit in that chapter about BBW performers, so Big Beautiful Women. And a few years ago, a bunch of people had agitated for a long time, particularly Kelly Shabari, and April Flores had agitated for a while about getting an award for an AVN award for the BBW category. And finally it happened. And I think it was 2015, maybe? There was an AVN award instituted for BBW. And it was a big deal, and everybody was really excited about it. And then, I think in 2017, it went away. They took the award back, and people freaked out. Everybody was very angry. And I did some investigative reporting on that, I think for Glamour.com? I forget. I think it was Glamour. And it turns out that the AVN award-giving organization has very specific rules about what can qualify for an award and what cannot, and it's based on DVD sales, which is really interesting to me because, nobody buys DVDs anymore. Nobody even makes DVDs anymore for porn, right? Oh, thank you, Adrian. I'm glad that you enjoyed them. I hope that you followed my rambling in some way, because I'm not really sure that I was making sense there. So whether or not a category of porn gets its own AVN award is based on AVN sales, or on DVD sales and marketing. Like, basically you have to prove that this content, this niche, is producing enough DVDs, basically, enough DVD content to qualify for an award. Which makes it really difficult for anything that has gained popularity in recent years to be considered, because most people who have started making porn in the last 10 years or so are not focusing on distributing DVDs. Most of them are focused on creating and distributing online content. So that particularly is the case for BBW porn. It's very online based. There's not much of a DVD market for it. And I don't really know where that decision making comes from. I think it's mostly because many of the companies who particularly focus on BBW content and many other forms of niche content, they're not big. They don't make a ton of content. They don't have the same access to big-time distribution chains that the larger companies do. And that just means that, like, they're not going to be focusing on printing DVDs because that's not how they're going to make their money. Particularly if you don't have big distribution deals worked out, you know, with adult retailers across the country. And adult retailers, because BBW was not as big of a niche in the past, they developed their distribution models without BBW content being a thing. So now that BBW content is becoming bigger online and is making a lot of money online, those companies have to ask themselves, okay, do we want to sink a whole lot of money and time and energy into distributing our work via DVD so that we can be considered for an AVN award? Like, and clearly they've decided generally no. So BBW's had this like moment in the sun where they were like, finally we're being recognized for our work, and then it was taken away from them. They got very angry about it. But it's just, those are the rules. Like, if you don't release a lot of DVDs, then your content doesn't get an award at the AVNs, which is kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing because DVDs, people, come on, it's 2019. Nobody watches DVDs. So, that's how that works. I don't know if anybody cares who's listening right now, but I thought it was very, very interesting because I'm a huge nerd about this stuff and I really like to know how it all works behind the scenes. And that being said, the AVN Awards are not the only porn awards in existence. There are many other award-giving organizations, and most of those are much more online-based than AVN. So AVN is really the Oscars of porn because it's like the longest-standing, most prestigious award that you can get would be an AVN, but there's the XRCO Awards, the Night Moves Award, the Urban X Awards, the TEA Awards, the, whatever, there's a whole bunch of other ones. I can't remember what the Gavian Awards for the gay side of the industry. Like, I mean, there's tons of award ceremonies. You can be recognized for work that isn't on DVD by any of these organizations. It just doesn't have the same prestige behind it, so people are upset when those categories come and go. Boy, I am like on a huge ramble rant today. I think it's because I have a lot of work to do between now and the Game of Thrones premiere, and I don't really want to do it. But I probably should go and do it. Okay, so things that are coming up. All right, so in 2 weeks from now, which I guess is going to be the 28th of April, I will be back. And on that day, I will be reading chapter 16. This is a very big, very interesting topic called The Gay Divide and the Condom Wars. So I actually kind of tried to smush two very big topics together into one chapter here because my sort of area of expertise, I suppose, is the straight porn industry. I am not super familiar with the gay porn industry. They're just two separate sides of the same industry, but they are separate enough that I just have not had, I don't have the same contacts, I don't have the same understanding of gay porn. So I didn't want to devote a huge amount of my memoir to gay porn because it's just not my wheelhouse. However, the condom wars, about whether porn performers should be wearing condoms or not, is a huge topic that is integrally entwined with the separation between the gay and the straight industries. So I smushed sort of some information about the gay industry and this whole continuing war about condoms in porn into a big chapter. So that is going to be on April 28th. I will be reading that chapter. It is long. I hope that I have my shit together enough that I can prepare for it well because it's complicated and it's intense. But it's a really, I think, interesting topic, and it's based on a whole lot of things that most people who aren't super porn geeks like I am, they may not know about a lot of the stuff that is going on around condom mandatory legislation and where that's all coming from, and the very weird divide between gay and straight in porn and where that all came from. Like, it's all jumbled up together, and it's, I think, fascinating. So at 1 p.m. Mountain Time on April 28th, I will be reading about that. Also, this coming week, keep your eyes on my Facebook and my Twitter and all of the things, because I'm going to be launching a Kickstarter for a comic book about vigilante dogs. It's always exciting and scary when you launch a Kickstarter, so I'm really excited about that. I'm going to be working on that Kickstarter for the rest of the day today until Game of Thrones o'clock, at which point I will be dropping everything except for my pizza. And other news, for anybody who missed it, my graphic novel has finally begun. This is Volume 1 of Tracy Queen. I know it's going to be backwards for everybody who's watching, but check out this beautiful cover by Stevie Ray Drawn. Check out these 60 amazing pages of content inside, including gorgeous illustrations by J.L. Draco and writing by me about Tracy Queen, who is a badass, who starts out as an enforcer for an organized crime syndicate, and over the course of this book becomes a webcamming sensation, and eventually, in the far future, will become a love warrior with an army of cyborg clones as she goes into battle against the porn army. So that's going to happen over the course of the next 7 issues. There's eventually going to be 8 issues that make up the whole graphic novel. So this is available now. You can buy it online at this point. We are going to be approaching retailers about carrying it pretty soon, but as of now, it is only available online at oneshipress.com/store. It is available in both the paperback and on Comixology as an ebook. So if you are an ebook reader more than an actual book reader, you can get it both ways. However, I really am very proud of the way that this print turned out, so I really hope that you'll get a print copy. Also, I'm selling them from, like, here. So if you order one and you message me, I can get you a signed copy if you would like that. So that's all the big news. I don't think I have anything else to talk about. So if anybody who is watching has any questions or thoughts, now is the time to let me know. Because otherwise I think I'm going to wrap it up and get to work on this Kickstarter that's launching on Tuesday. Tuesday is when it launches. And the Kickstarter is going to have some really, really sweet first day only rewards. So I'm just going to say, keep an eye open from, say, Tuesday evening to Wednesday evening, because the first 24 hours we have this one reward tier where you can get like $50 worth of cool rewards for like $20. So you might want to get in on that. Just saying, just saying. Yeah, so keep your eyes open on my Facebook page and my Twitter. And I think that's going to be it for now. Yeah, okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming through. I hope that you have an awesome next 2 weeks, and I will see you on April 28th, and we'll talk then.